We're learning a maamar. We've learned this maamar before on Pesach. It could even be we learned it last year. Hold on, let's bring up the text. Okay, this is a maamar on Pesach, explaining the idea of matzah. So it says like this. The maamar says, "Lahavin, to understand masha'imrim ba'agada." This is what we say in the Haggadah, i.e., during the Seder. That Matzah Zu She'anu Ochlim Mashuma. We eat the matzah, or we hold before we eat the matzah in the Haggadah. We hold the matzah, we touch the matzah according to each custom, and we say Matzah Zu. This matzah that we eat, why? Ashuma. What's the reason we eat it for? And we continue to answer the question Al Shum Shlei Hisbuk, because as the Jews, the Bnei Israel left Eretz Mitzrayim, Egypt, they didn't have time to bake the bread, and they had a rush, and therefore the bread didn't even have time to rise, and it was eaten as flat bread, as matzah, unleavened bread. Kigarshu, because they were, so to say, even Paro kicked them out, said, "Get out, it's time to leave," and they had to leave fast, and they didn't have time for the dough to rise. So, the mashma. So this is when we say this in the Haggadah, that why do we eat matzah? We eat matzah because seemingly a side reason. Hey Judith, the reason we eat matzah is because the Jewish people didn't have time for the for the dough to rise, the Bnei Israel, and they were kicked out, and therefore they had to eat matzah. So therefore we eat matzah to remember that. The mashma ha'ilu loy garshu v'hisbik lahachmitz, which seems to say that if they weren't kicked out and they didn't have and they had time for the bread to turn chametz, so then then it wouldn't be an issue. We would eat bread. We would eat chametz, leavened bread. But like for how can we say that? The Torah was Moshe Rabbeinu was already told by God before they even left Egypt on the Rosh Chodesh, on the new month, which is 14 days before they did the Paschal Lamb, that Be'eser l'Chodesh is on the 10th of the month. They should hold the Paschal Lamb, and then they slaughter it on the 14th, and then they should eat it on Matzah Zu She'anu Ochlim. They should eat the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, with matzahs and the bitter herbs. So they already had a commandment for eating matzahs. And in that same section of the Torah tells us, going forward, that after we leave Egypt, the Torah says that Shivas Yamim are lei matzah, that for the 7 days you should celebrate this holiday Passover, and God tells Moshe this all before they leave Egypt, before technically the dough didn't have time to rise. That Shivas Yamim are lei matzah, b'chol ma'ishvei sechem tochel matzahs, wherever you're settled, you should eat matzahs. So we see why do we say in the Haggadah the reason we eat matzahs is because the dough didn't have time to rise. We eat matzahs because Torah commanded us to eat matzahs and not to eat chametz. And God told it to Moshe while they were still in Egypt, starting on the Rosh Chodesh, and it started with the commandment with regard to the 14th when they do the Paschal Lamb. The actual pasuk itself we have to understand means where the Torah commands about the matzah and not eating chametz. In the commandment says that why do we celebrate Passover, Pesach, in the way of not having chametz, not having leaven, and eating matzah, is to remember how we left Egypt. Remembering how we left Egypt. The commandment with regard to Pesach of that year, the year they left Egypt, was only about not eating chametz on that one day, on the 14th. That don't eat chametz when you have the Paschal Lamb. There was no commandment in the Torah with regard to that year that Moshe told the Jewish people that year that you shouldn't eat chametz for 7 days. It was something that was told for later, for the next generations. So the question is, why? So what's this all mean? Kedisa b'Gemara, as the Gemara tells us in the Tractate of Pesachim, on page number 96. The idea is like this. That is the truth. The truth was that in the first Pesach, when they left Egypt, and this is what the whole maamar is going to be about, that there's 2 levels of matzah. There's the matzah of the first night, eating with the Paschal Lamb, and there's the matzah we eat throughout, or the idea of not eating chametz for the rest of Pesach. So he's in the Pesach Mitzrayim, yes, the idea was only 1 day. And therefore the only reason why they continued to eat matzah when they left Egypt was technical. Kigarshu, because they were kicked out and they didn't have time for the dough to rise. But in theory, there was no commandment going forward in that time, in that actual Pesach, to have unleavened bread, to not eat chametz going at it once the 15th kicked in. It was only on the 14th, 15th by night, that day, when you eat the Pesach Olam, you shouldn't have chametz. And that's why technically they ate matzah for the remaining days of Pesach, because their dough didn't rise, and they made quick biscuits when they ran out of Egypt. Nevertheless, we have a commandment going forward after the actual experience of Pesach of the first year is to not eat chametz for all 7 days. And you have to remember there's two things. There's the matzah of the 14th, there's not eating chametz on the 14th, and there's not eating chametz from the 15th until the end, the 7th of Pesach. We extend it 1 day because we always keep 2 days of Yom Tov, meaning Achron Shel Pesach. In Chutz La'aretz is because of a suffix, a doubt. We don't know when the 15th is because the question is when there's a new month. But in theory, Pesach is 7 days. The 8th day is the extra rabbinic day that we have in every holiday. So therefore, we have 7 days that we are only chametz, and that is a remembering to Egypt. Although Egypt itself only had the law of chametz for 1 day. So we have to understand what this all means. So to understand this, we have to first understand what is achilas matzah. What does it mean to eat matzah? Yesh lahagdim inyan moedim l'simcha. To understand what matzah is in general, we have to understand what does this mean in the Jewish calendar, so to say, in the Jewish religion, in Torah, that there's moedim times. Moed is a time l'simcha for joy, which is the reference that we have for Yom Tov, for the holiday. Sheikar hamoedim hu b'chinas l'simcha. How do we celebrate? And remember, a moyed, the holiday, is through happiness, through simcha. Be happy in your chag. In the holiday, you should be happy. There's a mitzvah, a special mitzvah. In addition to general mitzvah of being happy, is the mitzvah of v'samachta b'chagecha. And in halacha, in the law, it says how to be happy. B'basar, b'yayin, with your family, with your spouse, with your guests, with the poor around you. That the Torah tells us how to be specifically happy. A person has to drink a certain amount of wine, eat a certain amount of meat over Pesach, over the holidays. Not just Pesach, all the holidays. Why? What's simcha? What's so special about simcha? Why do we emphasize simcha specifically in the holiday? Because in the holiday is a time when what's called moichin d'ima, the intellect of the mother. We've learned many times the intellect of the mother is a reference to bina. We have wisdom and understanding. Wisdom is chachma, which is called moichin d'aba. The moyach, the sechel, so to say, the wisdom of the father. And you have moyach, what's called the intellect of the mother. You have the intellect of the father, the intellect of the mother. So the father is chachma, wisdom, and bina is understanding. Now we know the difference between bina and chachma is a spark, it's an unidentified idea. You haven't developed it yet, or you don't properly understand it, but it's connected deeply to the source. That's a chachma, is the first level of revelation. Bina kind of takes the chachma and is inspired by the chachma, by the wisdom, but understands it. In order for that, chachma has to kind of go into the background, so we can expand. And that's why in the letters of God, the first two letters of God's name is the Yud and then the Hey. The Yud represents the dot, which is Chachma. The Hey is the expansion, the space, the square. And that's called Moichin Dima. And because we have understanding and it's space, basically, it's the idea. It's not as raw or sharp as it is in its initiation, where it comes in as a spark, we call in Chassidus, Barak HaMavrik, the spark of the intellect. But although it waters down a bit, but because of that, you're able to broaden it and understand it. The Hainu Mashayim Bahalal, that's why we say in the Halal during Yom Tov, that we have that Keresabais. Keresabais is the woman of the house. Eim Habanim, the mother of the children, is Smechas, happy. Why? Because when you have understanding, you grasp the idea. There's an understanding of the idea. It's not just this spark of intellect that's not identified. It's broadened, and when you kind of have some level of intellectual ownership on the idea, it gives happiness. Happy has to come from a certain level of understanding. You have to know something. Happiness, that comes from that almost an inspiration without an identity of what it means. It's not such a happiness. It's a spark, but you don't own it, so you therefore can't develop into happiness. When you understand something, I understand it now. I'm in simcha. So therefore, Yom Tov, which is a revelation of the intellect of the mother, which is understanding, So with it comes, that's why they say the mother is happy. That's Yom Tov. Shabbos is a revelation of Moichin Abba, is the masculine father intellect, is the initiation. It's much higher than Bina. It's much more raw, closer to deeper the idea. Bina kind of waters down the idea, and therefore it's very important when a person has an inspiration or hears an inspiration and tries to broaden it with Bina to never lose sight of the inspiration, which is the Chachma. And that's why in Chassidus, this idea is called Likkutei Torah, the dot in the room. So the room is the space of the hay, but never lose focus. A lot of times you have an idea that comes to your head, and it initiates a thinking process, but then you start thinking, and then you lose bittul. It means Bina has to have a bittul to Chachma. It means to never lose focus what we're trying to understand. But sometimes, a lot of times, and this is where things, that's why from Bina starts the potential for someone to go off. Why? Because you have the inspiration, so to say, good intentions intellectually, but now that you're broadening it, if you don't stay focused on the idea, then your conclusion may not be according to the emes, to the truth. And you could start mixing in yeshes, your ego, what works for you, how the conclusion works for your agenda. Because a Bina has less bittul, because you're understanding it. And when you understand it, you may mix in your own ego to the understanding. So Yom Tov is happiness, because you understand. Shabbos is much higher. It's the father intellect. It's the raw intellect. It's the wisdom that comes directly from the inspiration from the source. And therefore, Chachma is always batal. Moshe Rabbeinu is Chachma. Anachnu ma, we're what? What is bittul? That's what we're going to see. There's less of a concern when when what's being revealed is the Chachma, because it never loses focus of its source. Chachma, the intellect of the father is much higher. And because it's the father intellect, and it's not developed, and it's not understood, therefore we don't find the requirement for simcha, for happiness on the Shabbos as we do in Yom Tov, because the level of revelation on Shabbos is so high that we don't own this subject, and therefore there's no idea of happiness. Yom Tov is, so to say, I don't want to use the word watered down, but it's the Bina, it's understanding, and the Chachma is kind of is not shining as strong, and therefore there's a place for happiness. And that's why also in the halacha, and when it comes to Yom Tov, they would have guards making sure that the simcha didn't get out of control, that people weren't inappropriate. Why? Because when you have, again, like I said, when you have Bina, it could get personal, it could get ego, it could get tainted. Because the understanding has a lot of yourself trying to understand the idea. And when you're trying to understand the idea, you may manipulate the conclusion to be according to your liking or according to your agenda, what works for you. The idea is like this. How do we understand? What is the character of the mother intellect? We'll understand the Mashanoida, there's two levels of how the infinite, Ein Sof is the infinite, light is revealed. How it's revealed in the chain of creation. In an orderly way. From cause to effect. Of ray to ray, means things in a systematic way develop into something. For instance, in the person's buildup of the intellect and the emotions. So we have the person understands something. And hope. So the idea of a person, what defines a person, is that your seichel, your intellect, your mind, should control your emotions and give birth to your emotions. The emotions themselves are higher than the seichel, but in order for them to be revealed, and that's what we mean by giving birth, is to reveal it in you that should be alive and should be controlled by the mind. That's what we say, moichin shalat al alev. The mind should control the heart. But the mind gives from the mind goes into the heart. So that's how a healthy chain of events. You have seichel goes into the midas, into the emotions. Umidas, and because you feel a certain way, and that's still connected to the intellect, to the idea, means you're not feeling. It means how do we make sure that a person doesn't get overwhelmed, or the feeling starts turning negative, which could be it starts off as a good idea, right? Started off in a holy moment. Started off you're feeling kedusha, holiness, but your ego got affected. So then all of a sudden you're manipulating the moment of holiness for an agenda. You get angry at someone else. Look, that person's not doing right. right? So how do you? So you have to constantly have the seichel that's controlling the emotions, doesn't get out of control, and then the emotions have to go properly into the machshav, into the thinking, that you think properly based on the emotions. And this is a chain of events called from something to something. It means there is the intellect, which is something, develops into the emotions that are something, develops into your thinking process, how you think about things and how you think about situations. So that's called yesh miyesh. It's something that starts, but it develops through the system of the person's being, which is intellect, emotions, and how you behave on it, which is the garments, which, as Tanya explains in chapter 4, are thought, speech, and action. I mean, how are you going to speak, and how are you going to think, and how are you going to speak? So that's one way of the infinite, how it's revealed into the system of creation. There's the infinite light that when it comes in not in a way of a chain of events. Yesh mi'ayin, something comes from totally nothing. It's not slowly a process how we could identify its path of how it came into. Why did you say that? Right? So what did you say that? Why did you do that? Is because you thought like that, because you felt like that, because you understood like that, because you wanted like that, because you have a desire like that. So that's the chain of events, tainug, pleasure, ratzin, want, thinking, intellect, feeling, emotions, and then you think because of that in that proper way of how that process is going. You'll speak about it in that language and you'll act on it. But that's all yesh miyash, something from something. Then you have sometimes the revelations, yesh miyan, it comes from nowhere. It means not nowhere. It comes from an unidentified source. Mamish me'ain muchlet, totally from the nothingness. So what does this mean? One thing's coming to the chain of events. When the effect is close to its cause, let's say the intellect is close to the want, or the emotions is close to the intellect. Mimata l'mayla, going upwards. You understand it means, what does it mean, masig elias? You understand the cause. When the effect understands the cause, is as if when the emotion says, why am I responding this way? Right? So why am I responding this way? Oh, I mean, Judith. So why am I feeling this way? Because I know this way, because I was thinking this way, because because my moyach, my brain, my logic understands it this way. So the ila, the olul, the effect understands the cause. And that's what it means, moichin the ima. What does it mean, moichin the ima? The mother intellect, that's what gives you happiness, because you could identify its source of how the chain of events came to being. You know why you're in this position. It's like I said, almost you own the moment. You own this experience because you could identify its source from the beginning. And therefore you have great happiness. And that's what the chag is. That's what the holiday is. Kimshal gives an example. Ben HaMelech, you have a prince. When the prince gets out of captivity, if he was in captivity, and he sees his father. So too, when a person has a great revelation, and you see this revelation, you understand the revelation, because the revelation of the Chag, of the Yom Tov, comes into the chain of events. So you could identify its source. And in Tachas, because it came down in the chain, and there's a great distance. And when you were in this distance, meaning when the son was in captivity, he didn't see his father. But when you understand how you got close to your father, right? The king is distant from the prince. Now, when the prince knows that he's distant, and now it could identify what happened. How did he get closer? So you can recognize this is a holiday. What is the holiday? A holiday is something happened. We were in Egypt. God revealed himself. So we were like a son that was in captivity. Now he's next to his father. So you know what happened, and you understand how these events came about in some way, and therefore there's happiness. That's what holiday is. It's in the house. We own the moment. Therefore the mother's happy. That there's the idea of she was the barren woman, and when she has children, that's another whole subject. What to mean ema banim smecha? If she's an akara, but the idea of akaris abayis means an akara, she was a barren woman. But the point is that when you get to having an identity of what happened, so then you have happiness. So when you have a situation that throughout the week, throughout the mundane time, what happens when you're not in this moment of holiday? So we have the chain of events continue, and Malchus, which is kingship, which means to say how royalty, how, in a nutshell, how the divine goes into space of this world through creation, formation, and action, all the way into the world of separation, the world of klipas noga, where there's things going on in your life, in your own space, the mundane, the distractions, paying your bills, keeping your job, etc., etc. As Malchus kingship, which means there's a godliness there, but the godliness is in the space of creation. The klipas noga, and in the klipa, that's the permissible, but it could go either way. You could take it and go in a negative path, or you could turn it around and make it into a positive experience, right? Your job could feed to be have a better relationship with God and keeping Torah mitzvahs and supporting your convictions of Torah mitzvahs, or you could be praying the whole time just that you should have success in your job because that's what you really want. It depends which direction you go. Or it could be even worse. You just want the money so you could support a life that's not holy, not Torah. Or be Yom Tov. I'm just giving this as an example of what does it mean Malchus, kingship going into the world of separation. What happens in Yom Tov? Malchus, which is out in the world, vulnerable, battered around, struggling, distracted, goes out of that space, goes into the world of Atzilus, which is all godliness, and therefore there's happiness. And you're able to take in the moment of the spiritual experience of the revelations. So the mother sees, that means Yom Tov is basically within the space of these escapes or elevations within our schedule, within our life, and therefore you're understanding the moment of holiness. Therefore, you have a lot of people that are very makbid in the laws of Cholamoid, not to work, which is what it says in Shulchan Aruch, not to write, is to just literally experience the Chag, to get that moment, to get out of the world of Bria, of separation, to elevate into the world of Atzilus through the Chag and the Cholamoid. Bechinas ema barim, bechinas hasaga barin seif aniglas. Sharin seif mishtal shvi yored az ba'ofen shiderchu mavel tfisa ba'saga. That during the Chag, there's a revelation that's attainable, that's touched. You could touch it. Tfisa means to touch it in your intellectual grasp. Each person what they can understand. That's revealed. And so you learn the maamar on Yom Tov. You sit down in a shir, in a class. You have a Sudas Yom Tov in the proper way. This is all a spiritual revelation. And you could touch it. You feel it. There's a simcha here. You own the moment. You love the moment. You're excited. You're happy about the moment. And not only that, you appreciate the great revelation. And therefore you have a situation that you go out of the mundane into a place of happiness. It's like a person who's in the dark who sees a great light. The point is that you grasp, there's a yesh, you see the experience. And therefore there's happiness. You appreciate what's happening over here. Everyone's dressed in their nice Yom Tov clothing. Everyone's in a good mood. You're supposed to be kind and loving to your family in a way that everyone's happiness, bring happiness. That's why Yom Tov, you have to be very careful not to bring bad energy into the Yom Tov. Never show bad energy, but specifically for Yom Tov. Because you have some sort of grasp in what's revealed, i.e. the face of the king. That's revealed during the holiday. For instance, the example giving what's Yom Tov. This all, we're explaining what Yom Tov is. There's like the soul, the Shemas an Eges Ba'olam Haba that takes pleasure in the world to come. Because there's a revelation, so there's great joy, pleasure. Before the soul was in the body, which was limited. Imagine your consciousness as you are now. Your character, it's not that it's not coarse anymore, but the what defines you as you, the character who you are is the character is your soul, right? So your soul, obviously there's effects by experiences, but all that, but the how you take experiences is your character. So take all that out of the limitations of the body and the limitations of the world and the effect the world has on you and its limitations, and you go into a place of godliness. That's Olam Haba. It's the world to come. And what do you have in the world to come? Revelation of godliness. So imagine you are as you are. That's why it's a world of you are who you are. And there's a lot to be said about that. As you are, you're taking in the joy of Gan Eden, of Garden of Eden, of a world to come. But in Chassidus, we don't celebrate that. Because life isn't about, upgrading your experience. It's the idea we want to get to is the bittul, to lose the you who needs the experience. But nevertheless, as is in Yom Tif, it's the Bechina of aim, it's the mother, it's the yesh. I'm enjoying this, a great, amazing experience. Before that, you were in the body. But now you go back to your source when a person's in the world to come. You're taking pleasure in the Garden of Eden. You take pleasure in the revelations. We learned this story, one of the stories that we told, again, on the Jan's inspiration of telling stories about the soul who went up. I think it was the Baal Shem Tov. The soul who went up, they tried to pray to get it down. Before it was about to go down, he didn't want to go in. He didn't want to go into the body. The person realized that all the limitations they have. He was in the Garden of Eden. He spent all his time in Garden of Eden trying to get back alive. When he finally let him come back alive, he didn't want to become alive. Why? He wanted to stay the way he was in the Garden of Eden. There's all this revelation, no distractions. I give, lahanchel means to give a nachla, a portion to the ones who I love. Yesh, something. It's an experience. You have a revelation. You feel it. Yesh, it's tangible. The soul grasps the experience. To take in the light. That's what happens in the Garden of Eden. You realize how great it was. And that's what we say about Yom Tiv. That you cross the river in the regel, it also means the feet or means the holiday. Sham Nisachav, by there you have joy. Pirish Binar, who Yetzim Eden. What does it mean, the river? The river that comes out of Eden, that feeds and waters the garden. Shubina, which is the understanding. The river itself is an understanding. Who Aliyah B'chol Rega, and the person elevates up that river. We go upriver on the holiday to the source. That's the source of joy. We own the moment. That's what Yom Tov is. Because all this, which sounds fabulous, but it's yesh. It's something. It's you have a strong investment and interest in this experience because you enjoy it. That's called the mother intellect. Bina, like Olam Haba, Gan Eden, and this is all experience of what it means, the world to come, Garden of Eden, etc. Hila Tanik and Neshama says, but the souls take pleasure. So what's the pleasure we have in the world to come? It's not physical, bodily pleasures. It's intellectual pleasures. It's an elevated pleasure, but it's even higher. They say that any pleasure we have in this world is only what's called the shirayim, the psilas, the waste of the true pleasure and godliness. It's hard for us to comprehend that. But if you committed to that idea that that's what it is, so it's something you want. That's all the intellect of the mother. What's the intellect of the father, which we said is Shabbos, which we're going to explain is matzah. Chacham can't identify where it comes from. Wisdom is a total opposite than understanding. Chachma is different than bina. Chachma is ma'ayin. You don't know where it comes from. It's this great light. You don't own it because you don't understand it properly. And actually, the more bina gets involved, the more dim the chachma becomes. The hope is you don't lose it totally. What does it mean, the nothingness? Something that's not understood. You don't own it. You can't comprehend it. It's way beyond. Chachma raw is way above understanding and comprehension. This is great revelation, but you can't grasp it. You can't grasp the revelation. The revelation itself, the source, what's being revealed is tremendous. But your relationship with the revelation is you can't grasp it. And because you can't grasp it, is because you can't grasp it, so there's no simcha. You can't properly take pleasure in it. You can't grasp it. So what is the experience vis-a-vis the revelation? Total nullification to it. Means because you understand this is real. This is raw. This is not a manifestation. So I should be elevated in an experience, like Judith wrote, an hour in the world to come of bliss is better than mitzvahs in this world, as far as the experience goes, but not as far as the emes goes. In the truth, we say, better be in this world. Why? Because in this world is the emes. This is the kavanah. This is the world with the intent. This is why the world was created. This is why this Garden of Eden. You don't understand it. You don't take pleasure in it. It's way beyond your grasp. But nevertheless, it's emes, it's to the truth. And therefore, in order to have any relationship to it, you have to nullify self. Because the way you are, yourself, doesn't grasp this idea. And that's what's revealed on Shabbos. Therefore, we say on Shabbos, because it's such a high revelation and so lack of self, even your own exercising your own intellect, that the rabbis were considered not even allowing Torah study on Shabbos. It's brought down Bekushi that with difficulties, 249 is the source of this, is the Gemara Yishalmi. The Jerusalem Talmud says in Shabbos that it was under great difficulty, after consideration, did they even allow the study of Torah on Shabbos. Torah takes itself from Chachma. Pirish Nafkas Yoytze L'chus. What does it mean, Nafkas? Nafkas means it leaves from Chachma. But Shabbos is the Chachma. So when you're studying Torah, you're studying what came out of the Chachma, not the Chachma itself, not the wisdom itself. Nafka Levar went outside. Shia Orabavat, it's only a ray, Hayoytze Chachma, that comes out of the wisdom. Aval Atzmis Chachma, the essence of intellect. Hirama V'niska L'maylam B'chinas Ayraisa is much higher than the Torah. The essence, the real source of wisdom is higher. So the Jerusalem Talmud was considering that if a person spends Shabbos studying Torah, which is what we do, you're engaging in the consequence of Chachma, what came out of Chachma, which is the Torah as Chachma reveals itself in a space of laws and the 630 mitzvahs, and how we do the 630 mitzvahs. But it's not the etzim chachma, it's not the essence of the chachma, because that's beyond even Torah, and therefore maybe you shouldn't even study Torah in Shabbos, because that the revelation in Shabbos is the essence of the chachma, of the wisdom. Therefore, there's no simcha. We don't talk about simcha on Shabbos. Because you can't have proper pleasure and joy if you don't have a saga comprehension. You don't have tfisa. You can't grasp it. You can't see the path, how you went from darkness to light, like the son who knows where he was and now sees standing in front of his father, the king. Behind him, this is because because you know there's this great light, but you can't really grasp it. But if when you have an understanding, so then you realize there's a light and you came back closer to it, so then you have happiness. Because that's only in the mother intellect. Because you own it and grasp it. How you see how this is higher and you were lower, now you're higher there, so you have simcha. But what's being revealed, it's not like there's this great light that you understand, that you don't even understand that it's greatness. You can't even appreciate its greatness, so how could you have an effect? How could you have a response to it? It's not that you're saying, I'm below and this is higher. How do you know it's higher? Who told you it's higher? Because you see that this is something great. It's like a person who sees someone and knows that you're not like that person. That person is much greater than you, but you could appreciate that this is greatness. You have a person, you don't even appreciate its greatness. You may not respond to that. In the level of revelation of Chachma, of Shabbos, darkness and light is the same. So how could you say, I'm happy because I was in darkness and now I'm in light? You don't know what darkness is. You don't know what light is with regard to this revelation. What does it mean? Like darkness, like light. What's mean kaf, both of them? It should have said darkness is like light. Well, it doesn't just mean to say that the darkness is like the light. Meaning to say the dark is dark, but now the dark is light. No, in the world of Chachma, it's not, the darkness itself is not dark. Not that the dark becomes light. Meaning to say that we know this is dark. How do we change the situation by making the dark light? The dark isn't dark. From that perspective, it's not even dark. Just like light is light, so dark is not dark. Not only that the darkness shouldn't be dark, but the darkness is like light. The light is like darkness. Who says dark is bad and light is good? It's such a level of, and we can't grasp that. How can we grasp something that's we're very definitive. We're supposed to at least know what's light, what's dark. I may not be in a place of light, but I know that I'm in darkness, because this is what darkness is. What happens if you don't even know what darkness is? It's in your place. Chachma is in a space. The higher you get into godliness, therefore, when there's conversations in throughout history, right? The angels say Rabbi Akiva is being Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel are being murdered by the Romans. Zu Torah, zu Schayra. Is this Torah and its reward? Shtak, be quiet. Kach ala b'rtzoni. This is how I mean. What does it mean? That's not that there's no reason. There's no reason that you can understand. This is something that has nothing to do with the angels. There's things that are beyond our comprehension. When we experience things that we don't understand, happenings in the world that we don't understand, it's not because if you just explain it to me, I understand it. It's beyond reason. It's beyond anything you could comprehend. You can't comprehend what does it mean that this is not dark. Not that the dark is now light. The dark becomes light. It's not dark. Who said the dark is negative? Right? Bad doesn't come down from above. You experience bad. You have pain. Pain is something definitive. I'm hurt. I'm mourning. That's from our perspective. We can't understand this. Like it says, just finish off this paragraph. The kol naharim mischash kamei, because for the essence, everything is dark. Like it says, Keser Elyon, even the highest level of revelation, which is Keser Elyon, which is the pleasure. Af agav the iu or tzach, even though it's a very pure light, or mitzuchtzach, very shined. Ukamu, it's dark. When you put it compared to ilas ha'ilas, to the cause of all causes. Let's skip further. Okay, so Beis. We're going to turn to the left side to Beis. We're going to learn a little bit further in Beis, and then I want to get to Matzah. Okay, so so we defined the difference between father intellect and mother intellect. Now the Rebbe continues. What does it mean kodesh? We've learned before that the word kodesh means separate. Now the word kodesh could be spelled two ways. Kuf vav dalet shin. That's you have one way we spelled kodesh. Or kodesh is kuf dalet shin, and you use the dot on top of the chaylam for the vowels to tell us that we have to read it like a vav would read it kodesh. Now, what's the difference? That's seemingly the sounding is the same. The difference is that the vav is a sign that even though it's separate, but a vav is like a line. It has a top and a bottom, and the top of the vav is a yud, which is the starting point, right? The chachma and how it comes down. So even if something's separate, it's separate how it is in the system. Kodesh without a vav is a milah b'karmei. It's just a word. It's separate, not because it's separate from, you have something that you're you and I'm separate from you. Then they're separate. It's not because there's you and then I'm separate from you. It's just separate. So it says about Shabbos, Shmatim says Shabbos, you should keep the Shabbos. He kodesh. It says kodesh without a vav. He ba'atzma. He bechins kodesh alin. It's a separate entity. Bechins chacham moichin la'abishim skal b'Shabbos. It's a revelation of moichin, of intellect that's revealed in Shabbos. It's not like vis-a-vis your understanding I'm separate. It's just a separate entity. It's only called mikra kodesh. It's a manifestation. We're calling from the holiness. So he says the Kabbalistic idea of how the outer midos, which are netzach haydisoid, which are the expressive midos, perseverance, acknowledgement, and connection, of the intellect gives inspiration into understanding. The point is that even in Yom Tov, it's not just supposed to be this, so to say, self-experience, yesh. in this experience, there has to be an inspiration from the moyach of the father, from the chachma. But it's the way it inspires and guides and directs the mother intellect. But you're not in touch with the actual raw revelation itself. Even though it's a feeling of yesh, I feel it, I own it. You can't say, God forbid, it's totally separate, as if it's disconnected from holiness. It's the way the yesh, the something comes from the nothing. And the nothing is kind of hidden, like perseverance, acknowledgement, and connection would inspire this yesh to keep it intact, so to say. But there's no revelation of the etzem midah, the etzem attribute of chachma. Because at the end of the day, chachma and bina are like two connection, the two ray and two friends that don't separate. Like I said before, if bina is not always subservient to the chachma, then the person can go off track. Then you're totally going to manipulate the understanding to work what you want. You have to have bittul even when you have ima. But the bittul is to stay focused. But the experience is personal. There's a revelation of the pleasure. Again, the pleasure is also something that's beyond our understanding. It's not something that's separate. It's actually revealed within the understanding, but it's an inspiration. It's not a way that we own that pleasure, so to say, that Hashem has, and therefore we're able to have feelings. There's the yesh over here. Okay. But let's just skip down here. It means that though we have the yesh and Yom Tiv, it's I understand, I see this revelation, but it has to be guided and experienced by the father intellect. Now the question is, how much of the father intellect is being revealed in the holiday? And that's where Pesach comes in. And that's where Matzah comes in. That the simcha should be from some revelation means there's an understanding that in this understanding, there's an underlying source of the greater revelation. It's just that it's not so predominant, and therefore what we're experiencing, we're able to kind of own the moment, but we're not losing focus of the source of where this is all coming from. That's the idea of Mikra Kodesh. It's not like Shabbos, but we're connected to Shabbos, connected to the revelation of Shabbos. Like a person who would call their colleague or friend, you call someone and say, hey, so-and-so, come here. That's not the name itself, is not the essence of the person, but it's enough of a representative of the person that the person should turn towards you and give you attention, right? So if you call someone, Mikra Kodesh, what does it mean you call someone? If you call someone and you say, let's say the person's name is Avram, say Avram, then in the name Avram is the person, because that's why the person turns around. But in the name Avram, that the person is that's only like a code to that person. You don't have the whole who this person is. The person turns their attention to you. But in the name Avram is just that code to get the attention. But you're not connected in the revelation to the whole full person. Everything that's going on in that person. So imagine in Hashem, right? So there's the Mikra Kodesh that you're calling to the Chachma in Yom Tiv. It has it in it, but it's not in this full revelation. It's only a manifestation of the father intellect. Like I say, Baruch Shem Kavod Machlusay. We bless the name, etc. Okay. Now, Vihine, what happens on Pesach? We learned the first 45 minutes, leaves us 50 minutes. Let's get into Pesach. That's why I'm kind of skipping along. So we just have the frame, and everyone can continue all the details on their own, please. But here the Rebbe says like this: how do we bring the father intellect to be as an inspiration? What's the Mikra Kodesh? What are we calling? How are we connecting our understanding to something higher? So there's kind of this in this experience of Pesach, of Yom Tiv. It's not just that you have this Bina understanding. The Bina is full of flavor of the Chachma, but it flavors it. And it's not, so therefore it's like a difference in eating a raw ingredient. You can't eat it. But if you put a little flavor in it, it gives a taste of that ingredient into the food, and the food also gets elevated because of that ingredient. That would be like an idea of Mikra Kodesh, of Yom Tiv. That there's the ingredient of Shabbos, but it's not raw Shabbos, which is not something you can't own. You don't have a saga, but it's enough that it gives it the direction and its taste. And how do we do that? How do we bring that taste of Shabbos into Yom Tov? Through tefillah, davening, Hallel, saying the Hallel. This is only rabbinic. And that's all during the Yom Tov, usually through davening and Hallel. Shabbos, biblically, we could do it by eating the matzah. Matzah is katnu saba. In matzah, that's why the matzah is everything. Matzah, people say, oh, it doesn't taste like anything. It doesn't taste like anything because it's the father intellect. The father intellect, you don't own the taste. It doesn't taste like anything, but you're eating. That's what we say. When you're eating matzah, you're eating godliness. You're eating chachma. You're pashut. It's the way. It's imagined. It's something that's so amazing. There's no other thing like matzah in Yiddishkeit. The pashut, when you eat matzah, you're eating moichin Abba. You're eating father intellect. Matzah, although yes, it's katnus Abba. It's not the full revelation. It's katnus. Katnus means the word small. Ki matzah. What is matzah? Matzah is moichin Abba. Matzah itself is the father intellect. There's a saying that says that a child cannot call father until it tastes grain, which is the source of the matzah. Why? There's no reason why, but that's just the way it is. Because once you start eating the grain, it gives that understanding, whether consciously or not, or whether we understand it or not, for the child to be able to say, "This is my father." And when the child knows this, it doesn't come from. It's not a process that we understand. The child doesn't understand. This is my father because him and my mother, etc., etc., and therefore I'm the child. The child just knows this is my father. He doesn't know how this is his father or her father. The child's too young to understand all that. So too matzah. There's no taste. We don't understand. We don't have the full flavor of the chachma. Therefore it has no elevation. It's way beyond our comprehension, which is the Abba. It comes down. It's the food of Amunah. What's Amunah? What's it mean, belief? What does it mean to believe in Hashem? Belief means this is your God. This is my Hashem. This is my God. But it's not the way that you understand it. Therefore, a person when throughout history, Alter Rebbe, when a person was lacking Amunah, one of the things was eat matzah. What do you mean eat matzah? What's matzah? Matzah is a very holy food, and it's like the child eats grains and knows this is his or her father. Why doesn't you don't know why? That's just the way it works. It's beyond our understanding. But it's the moich and the abba, the father intellect, the way it comes into a continence in a small way that's beyond our comprehension. But you're mamish raw, and it's in a physical. See, if tefillah, if davening on Yom Tov and saying Hallel is calling Mikra Kodesh, you're calling in the father intellect into the holiday. So that you can say, I understand when I'm davening, I'm praying, and I'm singing Hallel, I'm singing praises. Why? Because again, this is how you could understand to get connected to something a bit higher. Matzah, you don't even understand. How could by me eating matzah mean that I'm connecting to something higher? Just food. It's a tasteless food. That's the whole point. You don't have to understand it. And that's why matzah is much higher than davening and Hallel. And it's biblical, where davening and Hallel is rabbinic. When a person eats matzah and brings the father intellect, but that's only the first night. The first night we know is milcha de menusa, is the food of Amunah. The second night when one eats matzah is the milcha de misavusa, which is the food of refuah. It's a known thing that if a person needs to have healing, to make sure to have concentration when you eat the matzah the second night of the Seder, that it should be the healing for you. We know the Alter Rebbe once gave someone as a medicine matzah. But the first night, that's the night. That's why there's something special at the first night of the Seder, even in Chutz La'aretz, even outside of Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, we only celebrate one night matzah, and Pesach. But in that night, the light of Rishon, the first night, that's the food of Amunah, the food of Abba, of the father intellect. Hagam dechsiv matzah eichel eish shiv soyam. Even though it says you should eat matzahs the 7 days of the Yom Tov, doesn't just say it the first night. What does that mean in the context of this maamar? If you actually read the words, it doesn't say you should eat matzah. It says matzah is ye'ochel. Matzah should sustain, should provide, should be mazain the 7 days. Matzah feeds the 7 days. That means you're feeding this father intellect into the 7 days. The first week of the Sfiras Omer is inspired by the father intellect. The idea is in the first, although we count starting with Chesed, but the idea of the first week of Sfiras Omer is how the father intellect penetrates each one of the emotions. My Chesed has the bittul to the Chachma, my Gevura has the bittul to the Chachma, my Tferes has the bittul to the Chachma. And that's why, and we're going to finish here with the question, with the answer. That's why Pesach, there was only an obligation to be careful of chametz, of leaven, the first night. Why? Because that first night is when you have the experience of the matzah. Afterwards, it's to make sure to protect and preserve, not to vulnerabilize this moichan abba. The problem is that you need to have bittul. And if you don't have bittul, you don't have nullification, you could start with corruption. You have agenda, you have your own wants. So therefore we say Matzah Zu She'anu Ochlim means you really have to eat matzah the first night. The idea is to penetrate it into the first week. The most important of the first week is the beginning of the week of the counting, to make sure that you don't lose yourself. And as we explained many times in our studies, but at the end of all this, at the end of the 49 days, comes Shavuos, the actual sacrifice is specifically chametz. Like we learned in the Sikha. Why? Because comes Shavuos, you've guarded yourself and changed yourself and worked on yourself. That to express yourself and to project yourself is not a danger of ego. In the first week, you're too young. It's too early in the process. And you don't know how to identify and to be careful of what's ego and what's holy. You can confuse the two, and it's very easy. So therefore, Matzah Zu She'anu Ochlim, you have to feed the bittul into the 7 days. Therefore, no chametz the first week. Because it's not, you're too raw, you're too young, you're too inexperienced to know what is a true elevation, what's a holy elevation, what's an ego elevation. That's why throughout the generations, we don't eat chametz a whole Pesach. He says, but that was only regular Pesach. But the first Pesach was only 1 day. Because they had Moses with them, they had Aaron with them. They are the entity of the father intellect. Like it says, Aaron, they never left that focus. The cloud of Aaron was always there. The encompassing energy of the father intellect. And because it was so powerfully revealed by Aaron and Moshe, it's like the cloud that killed any snakes, scorpions in the desert. This represents bad ideas. These ideas that creep into your avoda, that think they're holy and they're not. They make you think they're holy, and they're not coming from a good place. But Aaron and Moshe were there. They protected the Jewish people. They had this cloud that killed all these negative forces. This external energy from Moshe and Aaron blinded the powers, the forces of the external. They shouldn't try to siphon off the situation. It was enough just to get connected the first night with the matzah, with the father intellect. That's good. Then they're safe. Because once you reveal it, that's good. There was nothing that could go. They weren't vulnerable because they were protected by Moshe and Aaron. Later, the next generations, we don't have Moshe and Aaron there to protect us. We need the 7 days. The matzahs should feed off. The 7 days should feed off the matzahs of the first night. But therefore, the biblical commandment is only not to eat chametz. There's no biblical obligation to eat matzah every night. But the fact that you're not eating chametz, and if you want to eat something, it's going to be matzah, that's enough of a protection. Biblically, you only have to eat it the first night. On the night of Pesach, you eat matzahs. Then it's an obligation. You have to eat matzah. God commanded. That how the day goes with all the midos, that's commanded in the first night. The first night, which is the day of Chesed, the first day is Chesed. Once you have Yoimam Yitzav Hashem Chaz, that God commanded, so to say, the father intellect in the Chesed, and that will give inspiration for the rest of the 7 days. in the days of Moshe and Aaron, and in our days, we don't have to eat the matzah. It's there. We just can't eat the chametz. Because if we eat chametz now, we're still vulnerable. But as long as you don't eat chametz, then the first night's matzah will penetrate through the 7 days. And he goes into, so what do we say? We have for 6 minutes. We'll go a little further. So what do we see from this? That there's 2 levels of matzah. There's the matzah the first night. Matzah lel rishon, which is chayva, which is obligatory. You have to eat a matzah. That's connecting to the moich and the abba. Matzah shekol yimei Pesach, and the rest of the matzah you eat throughout Pesach, which is just not eating chametz. And that's why when we ask the question, why do we say in that God that the matzah that the father that why did so the question is now we're still in a question which we're not going to get to the answer to in our little class here. But the meaning to say that we see there's 2 levels of matzah. There's the matzah that is obligatory, it's the first night, that is bringing the chachma into the experience, bringing the father intellect in, bringing the bittul in. For the Jewish people, that was enough in the time of Egypt, because that they had Moshe and Aaron to protect them. So why did they continue eating matzah? Because it says shlei hispik. It wasn't possible for it to become chametz. The dough that he had wasn't possible to become chametz, i.e. to become negative. They were too much in a protected space. Means we look at it just the technicality. Why did he eat matzah when he left Egypt? Because they didn't have time for the dough to rise. Shlei hispik doesn't mean that they didn't have time. There was no possibility for the dough to rise. Because Moshe and Aaron were there, and the rising would represent the concept of ego. There was no concern of ego. There was no obligation that he shouldn't eat chametz. It just wasn't going to happen. Because Moshe and Aaron were there to protect it. It comes afterwards, and Moshe and Aaron are no longer there. Then there's a commandment: don't eat chametz, because you don't have the protection. Shlei hispik, it's not going to happen. Because if you eat chametz, it may happen. So therefore, we ask the question: Matzah Zu She'anu Ochlim. What matzah are we eating now? Is this a matzah that's connected to the to the original matzah, meaning the matzah that's the feed, the chayva, the obligation, or is the matzah we're eating now to Seder connected to the matzah that won't turn chametz? So in Moshe and Aaron, it was a time that it wasn't possible to turn chametz. And in our days, we have to make sure not to eat chametz. But what is this matzah that we're eating tonight before midnight? And we say, shlei hispik, that we eat our matzah, and this is the Rebbe talked about in all the maamorim. The idea is to connect both matzahs when we eat matzah. Then when we eat matzah on the night of Pesach, it's not just that we're eating moich and the abba, the feeding of the father intellect, but it's also connected. We're also connected to the idea that we're not going to allow for chametz to enter our life. We're not going to. Not only are we connected to the father intellect, but we're not going to be connected to the father intellect just as an experience. We're going to be connected to the father intellect in a way that we're not going to be vulnerable. We're not going to take this experience, which happens very often when a person has a high revelation. Is they're vulnerable to corruption. They're vulnerable. Why that Alter Rebbe says why in the shul people fight. Why is there always stupid fights in shul? The window's open, the window's closed. You're sitting in my seat. You're making too much noise. Why are people always intense in shul? There's all this energy and it's not guided properly. So we're saying Matzah Zu She'anu Ochlim, this matzah, why are we eating it? What's it connected to? Is it connected to the matzah, which is the obligation, the obligatory matzah? Or is it also connected to the idea that we won't have chametz in our life? We won't have the negative forces in our life. So there's 2 levels of matzahs. Matzah rishon, which is the obligation. Matzah shekol yimei Pesach. And this is on the second matzah. We say shlei hispik, it wasn't able to become a chametz. Our fathers. They didn't need to have this watchful matzah throughout Pesach because they had Moshe and Aaron that were protecting them. That was just automatic. There was such a revelation. Let's skip here a little further. So you have a minute. Let's just see if we could get a little more of a point here. All right. So the Rebbe continues. This gets in long. The Rebbe goes and continue the 2 levels of matzah and how it applies to when we eat matzah now. And we're supposed to have the connection to both levels of the matzah that's giving us a moon, and the matzah that we're protected from not having chametz. It's a beautiful maamar. It's a long maamar. We don't have a shot at finishing it. The next class, we'll have a class in the middle of Yom Tov. We're going to learn already about the Shri Pesach, about Mashiach, the revelations of Mashiach, which is what we emphasize in the second days. So again, I want to wish everyone a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. Thank you so much for joining. At least a little idea of matzah we have in this class, and wish everyone should have a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. We should see only Geula Amitis and Cheres Amitis, true revelation, true redemption, and true freedom in our particulars and also in the general with Klal Yisrael with Mashiach Tzidkenu. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Welcome.